Every woman, from the age of 40, is dangerous. He was called the father of criminology. He believed crime was written into the body, in the curve of a jaw, in the shape of the skull, in the glare of the eyes. But Lombroso's most controversial idea wasn't about criminals at all. It was about women. He claimed that as women aged, they became more destructive, more cunning, more dangerous, more capable of tearing their own families apart. But was this just pseudoscience? Or was Lombroso stumbling onto a darker psychological truth, one that philosophers, psychologists, and even modern therapists still whisper about today? Tonight we will unmask this forbidden idea. Why does the aging feminine sometimes become the destroyer of the very family she once built? Cesare Lombroso was not just a man of science, he was a man of shadows. A physician who claimed he could read crime on the surface of the body, in the slope of a forehead, in the thickness of lips, in the unblinking stare of eyes that seemed too sharp, too feral, too predatory. To him, the criminal was not created by poverty or injustice, but born, etched into their very bones. But hidden beneath his thousands of measurements and sketches was a far more dangerous idea, one that society has never fully forgiven him for. It was not about men, but about women. He whispered that youth hides weakness, that beauty disguises cruelty, but that age strips the mask away. And what is revealed beneath, he said, is not the gentle mother or the obedient wife, but something colder, hungrier, darker. Imagine the 19th century world he lived in. Men ruled politics, war, and money. Women were confined to the home, trapped in the narrow corridors of domestic life. Their worth measured in their faces, their wombs, their quiet service. While young, they were idealized, decorations, saints, angels of the house. But Lombroso believed that when the curtain of youth fell, when beauty withered and children no longer needed them, something shifted. The docile figure became the strategist. The silent caregiver became the manipulator. He believed older women did not commit crimes with knives or guns, but with words, schemes, poisons, whispers in the dark. They destroyed not cities, but families. It is no accident that literature echoes this shadow. Look at Euripides' Medea, a woman cast aside, aging, betrayed, who turns her fury upon her children, burning down the very family she bore. Or Shakespeare's Lady Macbeth, whose cold ambition corrodes the house she was meant to guard. The ancients always knew what Lombroso tried to prove with scalpels and calipers. The maternal figure holds within her the power not only to create life, but to annihilate it. The hearth is both sanctuary and tomb. Carl Jung would later give this darkness a name, the shadow mother. Every archetype, he taught, has two faces, the nurturing mother who comforts, and the devouring mother who consumes. When youth fades and the nurturing role collapses, the shadow grows stronger. The children, once dependent, now pull away. The husband, once distracted by her presence, grows distant. And in the silence of that abandonment, something poisonous stirs. The mother who gave everything begins to demand repayment. Love twists into control. Care into suffocation. Warmth into icy domination. Lombroso's so-called science was deeply flawed, and yet there is something hauntingly true in the image he painted. Not a literal biology of evil, but a symbolic psychology of decay. For what happens to a woman defined only by beauty and service, when time takes both away? What does she become, when the world no longer mirrors her worth back to her eyes? Nietzsche warned that what we repress does not vanish, it festers. And in this festering, Lombroso saw his criminal woman, a figure of quiet sabotage, whose battleground is not the street, but the dining room table. To study Lombroso is not to study data, it is to stare into a mirror we are still afraid to look into. Because whether or not his skulls and statistics were nonsense, the archetype he revealed still lurks in families today. A force that emerges when love is exhausted, when sacrifice curdles into resentment, and when the once gentle guardian transforms into something far less forgiving. Carl Jung warned us that archetypes are not fairy tales or abstract symbols, they are living forces that dwell inside the human psyche. They are gods wearing masks, shaping our choices long before we recognize their hand. And among these forces, the mother is one of the most powerful and one of the most dangerous. She is life itself, the one who nurtures, feeds, shelters. But Jung also spoke of her shadow, the mother who devours, who clings, who binds her children to her so tightly that their very freedom becomes impossible. And it is in the twilight of a woman's life, when her children no longer need her, when her beauty fades and her husband's gaze turns elsewhere, that this shadow often rises with a vengeance. For decades she plays the role society assigns her, the caretaker, the anchor, the giver. But when the script collapses, when the children leave and the house grows quiet, she faces a terrifying emptiness. Who is she now? If her worth has always been her sacrifice, what happens when there is no one left to sacrifice for? This is the hour when the shadow mother emerges, not as a figure of tenderness but as a force of control. She demands what she feels she is owed. She sabotages the independence of her children. She whispers poison into family bonds, ensuring that no one can truly escape her orbit. Think of the countless stories we tell of this archetype. The mother who guilts her daughter for moving away, weaving sorrow into every conversation. The mother-in-law who undermines her son's wife, tearing at the marriage with subtle comments, feigned illnesses, or constant demands for loyalty. The grandmother who insists she knows best, splitting siblings against each other, forcing the family to kneel beneath her authority. These are not accidents of personality, they are the shadow mother speaking through them, the archetype Jung described as the devouring aspect of femininity. Literature and myth are littered with her face. Demeter, who nearly destroyed the earth itself when her daughter was taken from her. Hera, who rained down curses on the younger women who threatened her supremacy. Even in fairy tales, the wicked stepmother is merely the shadow mother in disguise, jealous, controlling, fearful of being replaced by youth. Age does not soften her, it sharpens her need to dominate. For every nurturing mother who releases her children into the world, there is one who chains them tighter, terrified that without them she will vanish into irrelevance. Jung believed that to ignore the shadow is to allow it to consume us. And so the aging woman who denies her fear of abandonment, her grief over lost beauty, her anger at lost years, becomes ruled by those very forces. The repression bursts out in passive-aggressive silence, in manipulation disguised as love, in tears that mask iron commands. The family becomes her kingdom, and she its tyrant. Not through violence, but through guilt. Not with swords, but with words sharpened by decades of unspoken resentment. Nietzsche once said that the deepest fear is not death, but meaninglessness. For the mother who has lived her life only for others, meaninglessness descends when the nest is empty. To avoid this abyss, she asserts herself in the only way left, by controlling, by binding, by destroying the independence of those she once nurtured. She would rather be hated than forgotten. She would rather be feared than invisible. And in that choice, the family suffers. The shadow of the mother is not born in cruelty, it is born in loss. Loss of youth, loss of purpose, loss of control. But as Jung reminds us, what we refuse to face within ourselves always returns from the darkness. And so the older woman, unable to release the identity of the mother, becomes possessed by it. She transforms from the giver of life into its devourer, ensuring that no one in her family escapes untouched. Sigmund Freud believed that what we bury never truly dies. It festers, it mutates, and one day it claws its way back into the light in distorted, dangerous form. Nowhere is this truer than in the secret life of women who cross the threshold of age. For when the power of youth fades, the beauty, the fertility, the intoxicating allure that once gave them command over men and attention from the world, the unconscious does not simply accept defeat. Instead, the buried desires, the hunger for recognition, the rage against invisibility, return in subtler and more insidious ways. And it is often within the family, the very place she once protected, that these forces erupt. Freud argued that repression is the cornerstone of civilization. We suppress desires to maintain order. But every suppression has a cost, and every cost demands repayment. For young women, much of their lives are defined by social expectations, to be pure, to be nurturing, to be desirable but not too dangerous. They learn to silence envy, to hide resentment, to channel ambition into socially acceptable roles. Yet time is cruel. As age strips away the external roles, mother, lover, beauty, what remains is the raw, repressed material of decades. All that was buried comes back, not as gentle longing, but as bitterness, control, even hostility toward those who embody what she has lost. In Freud's lens, older women are often caught in a psychological conflict. On one side, the ego that desperately wants to preserve dignity and appear loving. On the other, the unconscious that seethes with jealousy of youth. This is why so many myths depict older women lashing out at younger ones. Hera, queen of the gods, endlessly tormented Zeus's lovers and illegitimate children, not because they were enemies in power, but because they embodied what she feared losing: youth, beauty, desirability. Shakespeare's tales echo the same archetype, the older, cunning woman who manipulates behind the scenes, whose sharp tongue and sharper intellect carve wounds no sword could match. But Freud's darker insight was not just envy, it was rivalry. The mother and daughter, locked in a silent psychological war. The daughter blooms, her beauty attracting attention, while the mother watches the mirror betray her. What is often disguised as advice or concern becomes sabotage. She critiques, belittles, compares, all while insisting it is love. In Freud's terms, the unresolved Oedipal tensions resurface, this time inverted, the mother competing with the daughter, projecting her own lost youth onto the child she raised. Family dinners become battlefields, where every word carries hidden daggers. Freud also warned of sublimation, when forbidden desires transform into acceptable outlets. An older woman may not openly rage at the loss of power, but she might wield guilt as her weapon, manipulating her children to orbit around her, ensuring no one escapes. Her sexuality, once repressed under the guise of respectability, may reappear as obsession with controlling relationships, interfering in marriages, sowing jealousy between siblings. The unconscious does not care about morality, it seeks expression in whatever form it can take. This is why so many families quietly fracture under the influence of the aging matriarch. Outwardly, she is the center, the grandmother, the respected elder. But beneath, Freud would say, she is acting out the drama of repression, her hunger for attention disguised as caretaking, her resentment hidden inside passive-aggressive sacrifice. The family becomes her theater, and every child, every spouse, every grandchild a character she manipulates to preserve her fading relevance. And here lies Freud's most unsettling truth. Repression does not only destroy the one who represses, it infects the environment. The mother's hidden envy seeps into her children, teaching them guilt instead of love, fear instead of loyalty. The unconscious, denied its release, poisons the air of the home. A smile becomes a mask, kindness becomes a leash, and what should have been a sanctuary turns into a stage for psychological warfare. Thus, in Freud's eyes, the aging woman who has lived under decades of suppression does not simply fade quietly. She becomes the vessel of her own unconscious, unleashing it on those closest to her. The family, bound in love, becomes the perfect cage where repression turns to domination, envy, and destruction. The Stoics warned us that suffering is not born from what happens to us, but from how we resist what is inevitable. To fight against time is to lose twice, first against the passage of years, and then against our own refusal to accept them. And yet, when the years begin to carve their marks on the body and strip away the illusions of youth, resistance becomes instinct. Especially for women who have been taught, from the moment they were young, that their worth was tied to beauty, fertility, and their central place in the family. When those vanish, a silent war begins, not against time itself, but against everyone who dares to remind them of it. The Stoic philosophers, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, spoke often of death, decay, and loss. They said, "Remember, you will die, and everything you cling to will be taken from you. Accept this truth, and you will be free. Reject it, and you will be enslaved." For the aging woman, the decline of beauty is a kind of death. The loss of her children's dependence is a kind of death. The cooling of her husband's desire is another. Each stage feels like a funeral without a coffin, a mourning without an end. And because she refuses to bury these illusions, they haunt her like ghosts. This refusal manifests not in open weeping but in control. If the Stoics taught that peace comes from surrender, the shadow mother proves the opposite, that torment comes from clinging. She becomes the ruler of the home not out of love but out of desperation, forcing everyone to revolve around her as though their orbit could hold back the collapse of her own son. The son who wants freedom is guilted into obedience. The daughter who wants independence is reminded of sacrifices that must be repaid. Even the grandchildren become pawns in her struggle against irrelevance. The home, once a place of nurture, becomes a stage for tyranny. It is here that Stoic wisdom collides with psychological truth. Epictetus said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." The aging woman is not destroyed by time itself, but by her judgment of time as an enemy. Instead of seeing aging as a natural transition into wisdom and release, she sees it as robbery. She believes something sacred has been stolen from her, and therefore, someone must pay. And often, it is the family who pays the price. In modern terms, this is why the archetype of the toxic matriarch persists. She is the one who refuses to let go, who wields power not out of vitality but out of fear. Her silence becomes a weapon. Her approval must be earned through submission. Her presence in the family feels like an invisible chain, binding everyone to a role they can never escape. She cannot accept her own decline, so she demands that everyone else decline with her, crippling their freedom so that she is not left alone in her descent. The Stoics would look at this with cold clarity. Seneca wrote that clinging to what is fading is the greatest madness, for it makes us die before our death. And yet, how many women fall into this madness, becoming phantoms in their own households? They haunt the corridors with their sacrifices, reminding everyone of the past, demanding recognition, unable to live in the present. Instead of wisdom, they offer bitterness. Instead of guidance, control. Instead of love, chains disguised as care. This is why the family becomes a battlefield. The younger generation longs for freedom, the older demands loyalty. Every conflict, every silent argument, is not about dishes, traditions, or respect, it is about the shadow of decay. The mother sees in her daughter the beauty she lost. She sees in her son the independence she fears. And rather than surrendering, as the Stoics advised, she doubles down on control, believing that by holding on tighter she can stop the inevitable. But the tighter she grips, the faster everything slips away. Here lies the paradox the Stoics understood: to accept loss is to keep love, but to resist loss is to destroy it. The aging woman who cannot accept time destroys her family not because she is evil, but because she is afraid. Afraid of being invisible, of being forgotten, of being left behind. And in that fear, she chooses control over surrender, tyranny over peace, destruction over acceptance. Cesare Lombroso believed that women became more dangerous with age, not because of their strength, but because of their cunning. He saw them as predators who hid their claws until the mask of youth fell away. His skulls and statistics may have been wrong, but his imagery lingers, because when we look at the modern family, we still see his ghost. The devouring mother, the toxic matriarch, the woman who seems to love yet leaves scars deeper than any blade. Lombroso spoke in the language of biology, but what he was really describing was psychology. And psychology today has given us new words for the same archetype: narcissism, emotional incest, covert control, manipulation wrapped in love. Step into any fractured home, and you will find her shadow. The mother who cannot release her son, who competes with the wife he chooses, who plants seeds of doubt so that no woman can ever truly replace her. The grandmother who turns siblings against each other, ensuring loyalty by dividing them. The wife who rules not with tenderness but with silence, making the house a place of constant tension, every word weighed against invisible expectations. These are not accidents of personality. They are patterns, recurring dramas that play out across centuries, hidden in plain sight. Lombroso's criminal woman was never about prisons or police. Her stage is the family. Her crimes are written in the heart. Modern psychology calls this toxic bonding. It is the manipulation that keeps adult children chained to guilt, unable to live freely. It is the subtle sabotage of marriages, the guilt-tripping of grandchildren, the rewriting of history to make herself the eternal victim. The family becomes a psychological laboratory where she experiments with control, testing how much silence it takes to break someone, how much praise is required to keep them loyal, how much shame is needed to ensure obedience. Her love is conditional, her approval rare, her presence suffocating. And yet, she hides it all behind the mask of care. The culture around her makes it worse. We live in an age that worships youth, where beauty is power and age is exile. For men, aging brings authority. For women, it often brings invisibility. This invisibility breeds resentment. And so, within the family, she carves out a kingdom where she can still reign. She may no longer command the gaze of strangers, but she will command the loyalty of her children. She may not be seen by the world, but she will ensure she cannot be ignored at home. Every holiday becomes a test of devotion. Every absence becomes betrayal. Every act of independence becomes rebellion. Think of the stories whispered behind closed doors. The son whose marriage is destroyed because his mother never approved of his wife. The daughter who cannot pursue her own dreams because she is shackled to endless obligations. The grandchildren who grow up in a house where affection is currency, handed out only when it maintains the hierarchy. These stories are not new, they are the modern face of Lombroso's shadow. He claimed to see it in the shape of a skull. We see it today in therapy sessions, in broken families, in unspoken wounds that stretch across generations. This is why Lombroso's ghost refuses to die. Not because his science was true, but because his vision was symbolic. He saw, in aging women, the potential for destruction that comes when love turns into domination. Jung called it the shadow mother. Freud called it repression returning with vengeance. The Stoics called it resistance to time. Modern psychology calls it toxicity. But all of them are pointing to the same reality. When the feminine power of nurture is twisted by fear, resentment, and the terror of being forgotten, it becomes something far darker. And so, in today's families, we still live with the truth Lombroso tried to name. The house that should be a refuge becomes a battlefield. The one who was meant to protect becomes the one who divides. And the mother, once the symbol of life, becomes, slowly, silently, the architect of her family's ruin. Nietzsche once wrote, "In revenge and in love, woman is more barbaric than man." Lombroso believed age sharpened this barbarism. But psychology tells us, it isn't age that destroys, it's the refusal to face it. When the shadow is denied, it devours. When the mother clings, she suffocates. And when love becomes control, the family fractures. The question is not whether Lombroso was right, but whether we have the courage to confront the devouring mother within our homes, and within ourselves.